So I think we are past 3:30 p.m., so we should get started.
Okay.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to this session. My name is Priyanka Kaswan, and I'm ECGCA Vice President, Academic Affairs. Um, so before we begin this event, I would like to announce that this event is being recorded. And I would also like to request all the audience members to please keep themselves muted when they're not asking a question. Um, so in today's panel, we broadly aim to cover two main topics. First topic would be how like is academia for me, and the other topic would be how do I land an academic position. And to discuss on these topics, we have a panel of distinguished faculty from our department and a very special guest. So I would like to start with faculty from our department. We have with us Professor Ronald Walsworth, Professor Min Moo, Professor Rajiv Barua, and Professor Sahil Shah, who would officially be joining our department as assistant professor in spring 2021. And we also have a very special guest with us, Professor Dipankar Mehti. So Professor Dipankar Mehti actually completed his PhD here at University of Maryland College Park in the year 2018 under the supervision of Professor John Barris. And he has joined University of North Carolina at Charlotte as assistant professor this fall. So welcome, Professor Mehti.
Thank you.
Yeah. And finally, I would like to introduce the moderator for today's event. Our moderator today is going to be Professor Steve Marcus. So thank you all for joining us today. And now I would like to hand you over to Professor Marcus.
Okay. Thanks so much, Priyanka. Um, we have a lot to cover today, and I'll try to keep things moving along. Maybe with the panel, I may call on people, or you may say something. There's just a few of us. If others want to ask questions, what do you think, Priyanka? Should they put questions in the chat? Is that a good way to do it?
Yes, they can put questions in the chat, I guess.
And that way we can kind of see what's being asked and try to fit it with what the topic is. That might be a good idea. So let me start with, so the first topic is academia for me? And a number of topics were suggested. The first one is academia versus industry. Is academia something that our PhD students want to go into, or is industry? None of us on the panel have spent a lot of full-time in industry, but Ron, I think you've started a couple of companies and interacted a lot with industry. Maybe you'd like to start by sort of giving your ideas about advantages and disadvantages or differences between academia and industry.
Okay, so I haven't worked for industry, but yes, I've been involved in startups and consulting.
Yeah.
And I think there's likely different paths and experiences people will have with industry and academia. I don't think it's necessarily for everyone an either or decision. It's possible to move between the two. It's non-trivial in most cases, but you shouldn't necessarily think that after you make a choice to go down one path, it's closed off to switch. Certainly leaving academia to industry is possible. The other direction is also possible too, but it's a non-trivial change. So what are the pros and cons as I understand them? Academia, pros, you are in a vital environment filled with ideas and the development of ideas and the transmission of them to the next generation. There's a great deal of freedom in terms of the areas that you pursue. And you have this constant stimulation from other colleagues and a great flow of people who are coming through, the new students and et cetera. That's a lot of the pros. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Well, what are the cons? The cons are, at least in faculty, in the early years before you have tenure, you're under a lot of stress to get things done and to be able to get tenure. Even after tenure, to be able to maintain a vital research activity, one has to do a lot of fundraising and administration. And the dirty little secret is that faculty are used as kind of middle management throughout much of universities. Maybe it's not such a secret. So there's a great deal of work that we all have to do as academics and faculty to kind of just make the institution run. There's some other cons too. You're not going to be as completely self-actualized as you would, let's say, in a small company in academia. Let's say, okay, industry, big companies, pros. You will not have to do as much fundraising necessarily. There will be a mission will be set for you. You'll not have to do as much, let's say, origination of ideas. You'll be more working on technical problems, if that's what you choose to do, in the realization of those ideas. You will often, in a big company, be resourced to do those things pretty well, and you won't have to go find those resources so much yourself. You'll just be, and you'll often be working with very senior, capable colleagues, not necessarily having to spend your time on training people. That's also a con. If you enjoy the action of the business of training people, then you will have less of that to do in industry. It'll be some of the cons also would be less for big industry. You're less, again, self-actualized. You're going to be able to make your choices of what direction you go into less. Some other pros of industry, if it's big industry, you'll probably be paid better early on in your career and faster. You wouldn't have to do a postdoc or than maybe a junior faculty would. That may make a big difference for folks, let's say, who are typically in their 30s and thinking about starting families. Cons, you're not going to have as much of this vital flow of new people and ideas and in breadth that you would have in academia. Startups have even more kind of amplified version of the pros and cons. Like, you're not going to be paid as well necessarily early on in a startup, but there's the potential to make some company that becomes worth a lot of money. You have tons of freedom, but you also, it's all depends upon you, things like that. So that's my quick summary of pros and cons. Industry
Thanks,
versus
Ron.
academia. Sorry if that's too much.
No. You covered a lot of things well. Any other thoughts from the panel? What about work-life balance issues in one versus the other? I think often that's because of all the things, and we'll talk later about all the things assistant professors, for example, have to do, but that can be a difficult thing, trying to balance your life if you're starting a family, for example, and being an assistant professor. Okay, so the next topic has to do with the next couple of topics, I think, have to do with what it's like to be a faculty member in terms of expectations and responsibilities. I mean, you mentioned fundraising, Ron. Clearly, you have to have a strong research program. You have to publish. Teaching and mentoring is a very important part of what you do. And then there's some service, which hopefully you're not doing as much of when you're an assistant professor. So, Min, would you like to talk a little about the expectations?
Sure. So when I got started, some of our senior faculty, and in this particular case, Professor Ray Liu had gave me this analogy, the notion of starting academic career is actually like a one-person startup, except that there's a somewhat different type of a product and outcomes and expectations that we need to raise fund to get proposals and to actually to learn how to write proposals. And our near-term product will be our, we need to recruit good people, good students, and postdoc, especially in the experimental areas. And we need to have a good product in the near term. Those products that will be our research results, new research that are being published and disseminated through publications and the top papers in journals and conferences. And then in a longer term, the outcome and the product of our effort will be the students we trained. Actually, our students' successful career and launching to make those technical and career contributions will be our long-lasting legacy. So it's really toward that noble goal that we are spending almost day in and day out to work on, and both exploring exciting research as well as to train the student. So in the sense that I see the students and the postdoc, and when we build this research group, we are building our academic family. And we really kind of want to nurture the students, and maybe also as parents at times we also anxious, have anxieties to really see you grow. But really eventually it's the hope, at least hope in our heart, and we try our best to help you learn things and develop things, and together during your times here as students and or postdoc research associates, we explore those exciting scientific technological fields together. And we also, in our effort, a good part is not just for that particular outcome, not just that particular prize, but we may spend time, for example, revising the papers and helping you to rehearse your talks, not just for doing that paper, that talks really well, but really hope that we can help you develop the skills that you can launch on to be a good presenters, to be able to grasp future opportunities and launch to your career. So I think I found that as junior faculty, all this really a very steep learning curve. And if for our colleagues who have the opportunity to do some postdoc trainings, that may give you some time to learn the rope. And in other areas, in certain way, like including myself, at the time that I was graduating, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to be interviewed and offered by our department without being a postdoc. But that actually is really a double-edged sword, because no matter whether you have this period in your career called a postdoc trainings, you would have a period of time after getting the PhD to develop, to grow, and that growth is really very demanding, and especially you are given the faculty job that you have a certain amount of time to ramp up and to deliver, to meet expectations for the tenure promotion. So that is really a lot of stress, not for the sake of whether or not you will be tenured. I think our really goal, long-term goal, is not to just get the tenure per se, but really a bigger to really start and launch your career. And the tenure is just a milestone evaluation from what I could see in many sense. But this steep learning curve will add a lot of stress. And I see balancing that is not easy. And I did not have kids at the time. So I could see that the work-life balance can be even more challenging if there's young kids that we have to, or older parents that we have to take care of. But sooner or later, you may feel such of the needs of a balance. And we all really in this job of learning all the time, learning new technology, learning from our students, and being together to explore the unknowns.
Thanks, Min. Dipankar, I'm interested in how things are for you so far. You've been a faculty member for a little while. In terms of the expectations and your understanding of what you need to do to get tenure, for example.
Yeah, so in my opinion, one of the biggest responsibilities is students always come first. So you have to keep that in mind. If that means that you have to spend more times preparing your lectures, dedicate a whole recitation session, you have to do that. That's first and foremost when you become an assistant professor. And second is your research. Well, you are trained in your research during your PhD, but you have to keep it going. You have to do more outreach. You have to showcase that you can make other people believe in your research. And one way to do that is get some fundings from external sources. Of course, it's an expectation that you will get some funding from sources like NSF and others, but nobody is going to tell you that this is the exact amount of money. So becomes a little bit hazy. But talk with your peers, look into other people who have been into the similar positions and what they have been doing. So that's how you will progress in your research, get funded, use that funding to educate your own students, supervise them towards their PhD. These are the primary two aspects, teaching and research. But other than that, what I have been seeing recently is that when you become an assistant professor, there is a lot of training and a lot of committees that you have to go on. And that takes a lot of time that you never thought that it will take. And it could be a burden. Sometimes you will think like, why do I have to go to this training? Where I'm going to use it? So you are trying to learn something, you are trying to progress on something, and then comes all this added responsibility to you, which you didn't have to worry about in your PhD life or even in your postdoc life. So you have to account for those as well. It is also an expectation, and to some extent, it's a responsibility to serve in these committees. Although as an assistant professor, I don't have to do that much, but as I understand, as I progress, I have to be more involved in these committees, make some decisions that might, affect the whole department. So that's another responsibility. That could be another level of stress that you have to cope up with. And along with those, another thing that would be there is like your professional activities, like become reviewers for journals. As you become more known in the field, you will be getting more requests to review papers. Of course, you can decline some, but you cannot decline all of them. That takes a lot of time, even though it sounds like, okay, it's just a side job, but all of these adds up pretty quickly. And these are all responsibilities that you have to do. It's kind of a commitment that you make to this community that you will be doing so. And all of them kind of comes together at you when you start this assistant professor. This is like a step function you have to experience. But having said so, you will settle down. Everybody does. It's nothing scary. It takes a little time to adjust. I'm still adjusting. But I believe that sooner or later, with some guidance, we will all settle down. So it's nothing to be scared of. It's just a process. And as long as you accept it, you know beforehand what's coming your way, I think you will be prepared for it.
So we've talked a little bit about tenure. I want to be a little more concrete about what it takes to get tenure. So in this department and in the department I was in at the University of Texas, things are very, very similar, and they are at most places. In order to get tenure, you have to show that you have a solid and continuing research program, that you've published your research, that you can mentor PhD students, that you have sort of a nice stream of research and PhD students going on. The department wants to be able to judge that you can continue doing this with sort of yourself as the boss. We also, teaching is also important. We look at teaching evaluations, we go to classes, and we try to protect assistant professors from too much service, which in some ways is easy in a department our size because we have a lot of people. One of the things that's really important in the tenure process is that we get letters evaluating your research from experts in the field. At Maryland, in our department, it'll be 4 or 5 people that you suggest and 4 or 5 people that the department suggests that we will write, and they will be evaluating you. So one thing I want to emphasize is something that Dipankar mentioned in terms of being active professionally is really important. It's very important to go to conferences and be known in the field. When I get requests to write letters of recommendation. It's a lot of work, and I'm inclined to do it more if I know the person and know the person's work. So it won't take me infinite amounts of time to try to figure out what they've done and judge it. So be active professionally, and also in this process, make sure you have good mentors and get good advice, as Dipankar was suggesting. Starting with your PhD advisor, who you probably should be in touch with the rest of your life for advice, and people in your department and other people you run into. Rajiv, any other comments on tenure and the tenure process? You need to unmute.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, even though there are no written metrics on what the expectations for tenure in a department are, there are unofficial, unwritten metrics, and it is in your interest to find out what they are. So, you know, for example, in ECE, in our department, because it's, you know, it's based, you know, it's a majority of electrical engineers and a minority of computer engineers, there has been historically a lot of emphasis on journal papers. So in computer science, for example, there is much less because, you know, the papers tend to be, the best conferences are in fact the best venues in the field. So, you have to find out what it is. So for example, in our department at the time I was getting promoted, which was now 14 years ago when I got tenure, it was, again, these, no one should say these numbers, but I'm gonna say them anyway, which is, you know, probably if you end up with somewhere between 12 to 15 journal papers co-authored with your students, or I would say good quality papers. And in some cases, if you're in computer engineering and in top quality, refereed, highly selective conferences can be substituted for a few of those. The second cut is that, you know, some of the venues should be among tier 1 journals. So you don't have to have all tier 1 journals, but at least a good number. And then probably fundraising of, in my time, it was probably 500K. Now it's probably considerably more. I would imagine at least 800K of money that you have been able to raise pre-tenure. I would imagine that's the minimum. Many of our faculty have significantly more than that. And then, you know, you should have done some service and your teaching scores should be at least respectable. They should be average or better. Now, of course, every department, the rules are kind of different. The way you find these things out is you go to, you know, often many departments have, or colleges have workshops where they teach people on how to write grant proposals. Go and, you know, go to those, see if you can request some of your senior colleagues, the mentors in the department, for a proposal. Talk to them about what the expectations of tenure are. Talk to your department chair, and they will be able to give you a good idea of what the expectations are. I would recommend that when you're trying to get tenure, don't put all your eggs in one basket, in the sense that go for, let me rephrase that. Don't only bet on highly risky endeavors that may or may not pan out. Bet on a mix of some risky, slightly more risky, out there endeavors, as well as some things that you know you can get publications on, which are maybe lower risk. So that's it in terms of getting tenure. Now, but many of you might be wondering, well, before that, I have to first get a job, and you know,
we're gonna move to that later.
Oh yeah, so we'll get to that when we get to that. So yeah, all right.
Just want to chime in something.
Yeah.
There's another track, at least one other track in academia, there's actually more, which is smaller, more teaching focused colleges. Mm-hmm. Not as high a percentage of them have engineering, but some do. And there the standards for tenure and getting hired are somewhat different. It focuses more on teaching, not surprisingly. Research is important, but in a different way often. These programs will typically not have, these schools, will typically not have graduate programs, or maybe only a master's. So it's going to be more about research that engages undergrads. And the teaching load will be higher typically for all faculty, particularly junior faculty, and the focus on how you do teaching and mentoring will be much more important. All right. The discussion so far, and most of it will probably concentrate on universities like Maryland, i.e. large so-called R1 elite research universities, in which, as you just heard from Rajiv, the reality is teaching is very important and mentoring is very important, but you just kind of have to be typically solid, whereas your research will be judged, are you a world leader in some sense? And it will be judged primarily by the letters and which will be based upon your academic, your publication record and your prominence in the community. So other people will be judging.
Right. I'd second that. There are very good universities that focus more on undergraduates and focus more on teaching. For example, Swarthmore, which is a very, very highly ranked liberal arts college, has a really good undergraduate engineering program. And there are a number of places like that if you want to focus somewhat more, do research, but focus somewhat more on teaching. It's
a different experience, and it should definitely be considered by people. So yeah. It has its stresses too, but it's a different kind of stresses and a different balance of pros and cons.
Right. So a couple of things that Rajiv said reminded me of things. So he talked about not putting all your eggs in one basket, and another thing that's related to that is that we want you to show that you can have your own research program with your PhD students and publish papers with your PhD students. And so it's good to have some research funding where you are the principal investigator, but it's also fine to be involved in research with other people, where other people are principal investigators, and that you can really, one, you can often do more interesting things that way, but two, you can also leverage what's going on with the other people and end up with, more research and more publications. A second thing I would say is, in terms of how you know what the metrics are and how you know what people have done to get tenure, you can't see the letters that have been written for people, but you can ask your more senior colleagues who just got tenure to let you see the package they put together. And we often do that. And then you get some idea of what your colleagues at your institution have done, or people at other institutions. I mean, my first research grant, this was before career awards at NSF, they had things called research initiation grants. And I had my advisors, he was just a little older than I was, I had my advisor's successful proposal as a model. And it's important to ask for models of things because it's difficult to just pull these things out of nowhere.
Adding to that, there are ongoing workshops at UMD Med School, which talk about how to write your first R01 grant, career development grant. And I think if students are interested, they should take up those those workshops because they are pretty interesting. They talk about what should go in there. They give you a sample NIH grant, NSF grant, and I think that those are pretty useful when you are submitting your first grant.
I don't know if you know this, Sahil, but the Clark School of Engineering has a site called ClarkNet that you can log into as a faculty member, and it has samples of proposals to all the different agencies that have been written by successful grants that have been written by our faculty. So maybe we should talk about that later.
Yes.
It's a good thing to know about.
In general, communication is an extremely important skill, both in person, verbally, orally, and also written communication. Learning how to write proposals, papers, give good talks, extremely important. And the international language of science is, in addition to math, is English, and engineering is the same way. So improving for those who are not native English speakers, that's an additional challenge, but an important one that people need to confront.
Adding on
Min?
to what Ron just said, indeed, actually, there are many resources that campus have for graduate students. Unfortunately, it may not have been best utilized, including there are still rooms for our engineering students, our ECE students to better utilize those resources. From written communications to oral presentations, there are various training workshops. They really provide very good advice and hands-on trainings, and I really strongly encourage the students and the postdoc researchers in this event, and also spread the word to your friends and colleagues. Those communication skills that Professor Woodworth mentioned are very, very important, and it takes time and takes experience. But it's learnable skills, and it would reward those who paid attention to. And our college have also been teaming up with, for example, graduate schools in the springtime to provide the training workshops specifically for our engineering graduate students to prepare, for example, the 3-minute thesis presentation, very succinct, attractive, and accessible summary of your research. And those students who have participated really did very well in both college level presentation and then went on to win the university award. And one of the students actually was selected to compete on the global level. So I see this is tangible for every student, and our ECE student had a very strong track record. So I encourage everyone to really best utilize the resources on campus in the college and department.
And if they want to know more about those resources, can they email you?
Yeah, they can email me and or Nick, so our coordinator. And
Yeah.
we have also circulated with the faculty and with the graduate students. But I know many of you receive many emails every day. But do reach out to us if you are interested in and haven't seen those resources.
Maybe we should pause for a minute and ask if there are questions from the audience about being a faculty member before we move to talk about how to get an academic position. I guess I would first say that I've now been doing this for, 45 years. I was at University of Texas for 16, and I've been here for 29. And it's just been a wonderful career. It has allowed me to do many different things because of the freedom I have and move into different fields of research, sometimes focus more on teaching. If the research isn't going well, diving into teaching and vice versa. And, wonderful colleagues. So it's, we may talk a lot about the difficulties, but at least for me, it has been a wonderful life so far. Are there any questions about being a faculty member from anyone? Okay, so here's a question. If you are assigned to teach a course as a junior faculty, are you expected to create all content from scratch, or are there models from previous semesters to use? I always recommend, so I was department chair of this department for 5 years, and I always recommended to junior faculty that they talk to people who've taught the course to find out many, many things, models. In my experience, all of our colleagues are willing to share everything they have. If they have a website and it's online, share that, share how they did things, share. It's good to know how the course has been graded in the past, so you don't sort of grade too hard or too easy compared to the norms. But use your senior colleagues as mentors. And also, I mean, when I'm teaching a course, I look around at what's happening at Berkeley and what's happening at MIT and what's happening at Stanford. I mean, so much is online. There are many models. Are
So I
there,
was assigned 303 next semester, and I've been talking to the previous instructors to get the materials for this semester and the previous semester. So I think that's something which you should do. Uh, if you have taught before in your PhD or postdoc, as a postdoc, you should also leverage that. I had experience as an instructor, so I could take those things, but if you don't, you should definitely talk to senior instructors in the or professors in school.
so there was a question, are there any, quote, common grants to chase as an assistant professor like the NSF Career Award? And Professor Walsworth said there are many programs for junior faculty in almost every funding agency and private foundations. There are awards specifically aimed at junior faculty in every Department of Defense agency and probably the Department of Energy and
NIH.
what NIH, absolutely. So yes, there are, you know, you should apply for,
Good foundation, many of these things.
yeah, yeah,
Also the Department of Defense, AFOSR, and others.
right,
Oh,
right.
no.
FOSR, ARO, all those agencies. And, but apply for those, but you can also apply for regular grants from those same agencies.
In some ways, it's sometimes a little easier to get the first grant or two than it is maybe 5, 7, 8 years in. Maybe you've just gotten tenure. Congratulations. But you're not yet a world famous big cheese like Professor Marcus, who can, for which the money just rolls in. I'm joking.
Yeah, right.
And so there's this in between period in which you're not eligible anymore for the youngster junior faculty awards, but you're not yet, you haven't yet reached a plateau of a self-sustaining operation. And that can be challenging, another challenging period.
And another thing that's important about communication is you want to be talking to program managers at all these different agencies and try to understand what they're interested in, tell them what you're doing. They may send you to somebody else, but communicating with them, communicating with people in the field are all really important. Other comments?
And if you're a postdoc, you should definitely look into the K99s from NIH. They actually have a period of funding for your postdoc, and then you can take that funding with you as an assistant professor. And actually, it's a good way for you to interact with the program managers and how to actually write a NIH grant. So I think that's a great experience for you as a postdoc without just submitting those K99 grants.
Mm-hmm.
One side comment, if I may.
Sure.
There are several grants, but some of them might require US citizenships. So
Yep.
be cautious of that as an international applicant. You might not be able to apply for that. And those have deadlines like within first 3 years of your assistant professor or things like that. The good thing is talk to your colleagues, of course, talk with your advisors. They will know much more about what grants are applicable in your field, and make a plan that if this does not work, what is the next venue you can send the same proposal and go from there.
So there's a question, what are the options and challenges for international PhD students in both academia and industry? Anybody want to take a stab at that? I mean, we hire a lot of non-US citizen PhD students as faculty and have over the years. You know, I see, you know, my international PhD students also getting jobs at, you know, IBM Research and Google Research and, you know, the various industry laboratories. Of course, whether one can get visas depends on current policies, but any particular thoughts by the panelists on this?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Rajiv here. So, in some sense, it's easier being a faculty member in terms of getting visa status in the US. So the typical route that used to be followed in my day was, you had a curricular practical training on an F1, which gave you 27 months with STEM extension of being able to work in the US, within which time you applied for an H1, and then you had 6 years, and during that time you applied for a green card. The problem now has H1s have become heavily oversubscribed. Only less than 1 in 3 actually get an H1. They have far more applicants than there are students. So a lot of people are having to leave. But the good thing about being a professor, if you've done a PhD in the area and you move on to being a professor, there is in the immigration code category 1, which is basically what they call exceptional professor or outstanding researcher or something like that. It's meant for faculty as well as researchers at research labs and industry. If you did a PhD in the field and then you went to a research lab in industry, or you're a professor and you have good recommendation letters, it takes a long time to prepare this. And I did that. Now, of course, this was 18, 19 years ago, but I did that, and I never had an H1 because I never needed it. I went straight from curricular training to a green card because it took me longer to, put together the application. It took me 9 months to put together the application, but only 3 months to get a green card after that. So in some sense, your immigration situation will be easier if you're a faculty member as compared to going to industry. Now, of course, if you go to industry in a research lab, then it's easier. But if you go to industry in a development position, you can still get it, but you'll have to talk to your lawyer as to whether you still qualify for category 1, which is difficult. But category 2 is, again, oversubscribed. You may end up taking 10 years to get a green card. You may never get one. So in that sense, if you're an international student, being a professor is easier. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rajiv. Why don't we move on to how do I land an academic position, is the way Priyanka put it. How does one start? When should one start? What steps to take? Is a postdoc a good or a bad idea? Maybe you want to start, Sahil, since you're the most recent person who has done this successfully.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, I think for me at least, postdoc was a way to think about what I would like to do as an assistant professor. What would be my first grant? Like, what would be the first grant I would write as soon as I get there? What would my research lab look like? Those are the kind of things you don't have time to think about during your PhD. You are doing your defense, you are writing your thesis. These are some of the things you would get time during your postdoc. And the other thing is writing grants during your postdoc. So if your PI allows you, you should obviously be involved in writing grants, even if it's just an NSF or a small seed grant to your institute. It just helps you think about what bigger picture looks like. So that's very important for, you can't talk about very detailed stuff to reviewer because they are always looking at how this would apply to public health, for instance, in case of NIH, how it's going to help public health if you are designing this device. So those kind of things are important. And I think postdoc gives you that mindset of how you would do that. Obviously, there are people who have got, especially in electrical engineering, people have got jobs right after your PhD. But as Min said, that might, there is a steep curve of learning of mentoring students as well as writing grants. And those are the important aspects which postdoc allows you to think through it.
And the postdoc also gives you a little more time to build up your publication record when you don't have all of these other pressures that a faculty member has.
Right, exactly. So you have funding for you from your PI, so you allowed to go into a different route. If your PhD research was a little different, you can explore a little different area and then maybe come up to show that you are different from both of your PIs, in the sense that your research would be a little different from what your two PIs did back at your home institute. So that's also important to show that okay, how you would show that your research is different from others in the field, and how you would innovate in that area.
So did you apply to 100 universities, or when did you start? Sort of how did you go about it?
So yeah, so about 40 of them. That's like, I think I've heard that most of the people do. I've heard people go above 100 too. You're taking into consideration all the teaching schools and everything. You should, but then again, you have to think from your faculty perspective. They have to give you a recommendation for 100 schools, and that's going to be a mess. So getting every 5 people to recommend you for those 100 schools, it's hard. So you have to balance it out. Try to get some schools which are your dream schools, some schools which you think you might get because of your PI's influence in that school or contacts in that school. That's important, because for instance, at Caltech, they get like about 800 applicants for one position. So usually if somebody pings your PI, if your PI pings the person over there, it's easier to get an interview. So that's one of the biggest thing, is how to figure out, get your application known in those stack of 800 applicants. And that's the name of the game, is to first get your application seen by the committee.
And so you get your advisor to let you know which places he or she would be
Right.
willing to put in a good word, basically.
Right, exactly. And write a personal email at least to
Mm-hmm.
or somebody in the committee saying that, hey, my PhD student or postdoc is applying, you might want to see them, take a look at their application. And that's the best way you could get your application known.
There's one question in the chat. If you do a postdoc, is there a penalty if you do one in Europe versus the US? I think, I'll just throw in my thoughts, which are, what you want to do is a postdoc at a very good place with a very well-known person, if you can. There are certainly places in Europe that are outstanding institutions that have people that we all know. Any thoughts about that from anybody on the panel?
Steve, I agree with that. So I just chaired our faculty search committees, and also with the previous ones. We do interview outstanding candidates from very well-known, highly visible groups. From outside the U.S. and particularly Europe was one of the places that we may have a considerable number of outstanding candidates. But relatively, I think the total number of candidates that we may interview are from U.S., given that U.S. has a large number of outstanding institutions and highly active, highly regarded groups in our area.
So Dipankar, so you went through this process relatively recently. What was your process like? How did you think about things? What was the application process like? Did you do a postdoc? You want to share with us?
Yeah, so I did a postdoc, and as other panelists said, postdoc was really helpful. It was really helpful for me to think what I want to work, what I see that I can work for next 5-10 years. So build my research plan. Postdoc also gave me the opportunity to co-instruct a course, which as a graduate student, you cannot do always. You can be a TA but co-instructing is a little bit different. There is future faculty program, by the way, at our Clark School, which allows you to do that. But if you are somehow not able to do that, you can do it in your postdoc teacher course. So that was also very helpful for me. I helped my advisor at postdoc write grants. So I knew how the process is, what to write, what not to write. It's very different from writing a research paper. So all those things were very helpful during the postdoc process. Another thing that was very helpful during that process regarding applications is to know the timeline of the process. The application starts at a particular time, generally in September or October. Sometimes they start a little bit early. So you have to be ready before they start putting announcements. So you have to make a plan of when you should write your application materials. Generally, it's a good way to do it during the summer before which you are trying to apply. And I did that. I made my research statement, my teaching statements. And what I found out for myself is that I had to do a lot of revisions on that. I sent it to a couple of people, of course, my advisors, some of the professors that I know, so that I get feedback. And it's good to send your application package to somebody outside your niche community so that you get a broader view, because the search committee might have people from different aspects. So you have to reach out to a broader audience than just your advisor or supervisor. So that was also helpful for me to do during this preparation process. Another thing I noticed that there are a lot of applications possibilities, like a lot of vacancies, but not all of them asking for the same skill set I have. So there are a little bit of different keywords. So I have to change my application package according to that. And that's not easy. So you have to write your application package in certain way that you can change parts and fit it to those applications. And that takes time. That takes, of course, practice. Therefore, it is important to know the timeline, when you should have it ready, when the packages starts coming, and you should be able to submit as soon as it comes in, September or October. One thing I cannot say that I have never been to a committee who hires people, so I don't know how the applications are reviewed, but my understanding is that once you put your applications, they do not possibly wait for the last minute. Maybe they start reviewing some applications in the middle. So therefore, there is an incentive for you to reach them early rather than the last deadline. And other than that, of course, your advisor should be supportive of you to all the places you are applying. His recommendations is important. So talk to your advisor and see where they recommend you to apply. Your advisor can call somebody, as panelists said. That will be a big help. And once your application is in, then it's a regular process. They will look at your application. If they find it interesting, they will call you for a phone interview. That's the chance for you to show them that what you can do, what you can think of their department in next 5 years. And the next process is you will get invited for a job talk, and you deliver your research vision, teaching vision, things like that. You talk to many people during job talks. It's a day, if not 2 days. So be prepared. It's a very tiring process. It could be tiring. You have to always put up your smiling face, even though you are tired at the end of the day. You have to know who you're going to talk to, what their specialties are. But I think as you progress along these applications, you will get familiar with this process. And if you're not, talk to your advisors. They might let you know who to talk, who to reach out when you are at those universities. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends. And anytime, we are panelists, not just for one day. If you need any help from us, just reach out to, at least to me. I would be very much willing to help you any way we can. So just make a plan in your head when you want to apply and plan accordingly.
Thanks, Dipankar. I wanted to amplify a couple of things. One, you said that your advisor is very important. Your advisor will be writing a letter. In fact, you'll need to get 3 letters probably from people. So it's important to get to know other faculty and have other faculty know what you're doing in your research. I mean, you'll have additional faculty if you do a postdoc, but there's some students who just pretty much interact with their advisor, and you really need more than that. As you said, it's really important to do your homework before you go to an interview. I've interviewed people who didn't seem to know anything about the department, and there's no way that person gets a job. The person who knows something about what my research is and asks a good question, that makes a huge difference in an interview.
I'll add something else. I mean,
Yeah.
what ends up happening is, fortunately, there's lots of applications for a given position, and many people won't get invited for the interview and may not hear anything back other than some form email soon after they responded, and they may not get feedback. Why didn't you choose me? Or and then people get to the final stage of the interview, but they're not the one that's the candidate that the position's offered to. It would be helpful if they got feedback as to how they could improve, and that typically does not happen, right? So and it's not anything about anyone's school. The community doesn't have the bandwidth to be able to do that, apparently. So that makes it a bit frustrating for people who are applying in a given year and trying to figure out the game of where they're getting offers and callbacks and not. And some people end up sticking around in a postdoc for another year and then applying the next year, and they want to improve their application, but they didn't get a lot of feedback. So it would be better if that wasn't the case, but it is.
It also is because people are worried about legal issues.
Sure.
And, you know, you usually don't tell people why they didn't get a job for
Right.
that reason.
It's too bad in a sense that is the case, though, because as part of mentoring as a community, we'd like to help improve.
True.
Right?
There's one question. How do you choose a postdoc position? And when should you start thinking about it? But I think more important, is it preferable to deviate from the research focus of your PhD in a postdoc? Any thoughts on that?
I'd like to chime in on a couple of things that we discussed already.
Sure.
By the way, to everybody, I'm not on the panel. I'm a faculty member in the department. My name is Andre Titz. So I want to talk about a couple of things. One thing is I think Sahil mentioned there was 800 applicants at Caltech for one position. Well, in this department, we probably have 200 applicants for positions, something like that. That should not turn you off for two reasons. One is that many of our graduate students, so every year, some of our graduate students get faculty positions at places. Okay, so you're at a very good university here, and automatically you will be towards the top of that pile. Second, those same 800 applicants or 200 applicants apply to lots of schools. Okay? And they will go only into one, right? I mean, they may be accepted by more, but they will not join more than one school. So in fact, the odds of getting a faculty position are not that low. Okay? If you do good work, good research, if you write good paper, if you first select a good problem to work on, a hard problem to work on, and work hard and contribute good research. Second, write good papers, write very clearly. It's very important to spend a lot of time on writing your paper to make it extremely clear. Otherwise, people will not write it, will not read it, sorry. Even so, every paragraph should be clear. The abstract should be very clear, of course, because people will just, first the title, people look at the title, if they're not interested, they will not read the paper, then they look at it. The abstract, again, they set the paper aside. So it's very important to write very good paper. That takes a lot of time, because the first few times you write a paper, takes a lot of time. You will learn from your advisor and from other graduate students, definitely from other faculty in your department. So write good papers, give talks at conferences, give good talks at conferences, and you can practice usually in your own department. Here at Maryland, graduate students give talk within the academic talk series of the ECEGSA. So you can practice your talk in front of other students. You ask if you can convince your advisor to send you to the conference. So for one thing, you have to write a paper for that usually, right? And you should give the talk, you should practice for the talk before, give a very good talk. Very important to give very good talks, to write very good papers. That's not sufficient, no. You must also get people to look at your papers, to listen to your talk, because if they never heard of you, for instance, then will not go to the session where you are giving a talk. So you have to get people to know you. And there are several things you can do for that. So an important thing is that when you do get to go to a conference, or maybe more commonly, when there's somebody who is coming to your university to give a talk, somebody who is maybe well respected, you should definitely go to the talk of that person. You should try to meet with that person. Usually the talk is hosted by a faculty member here. And very often the faculty member has a hard time filling the schedule. So if you insist with the faculty that you like very much to meet with the visitor, and also it could be a group of you and a couple of friends, right? You meet with the visitor, you can briefly talk about your research on the board. And the next day, you send email to that person. Remind him that you have met with him or her, and of course you thank that person, and you send a copy of your paper, something. Okay. If you don't do that, they may not remember your name later. But so that way you may start making connections. When you go at conferences, you go to talks, you talk. A good thing to do is ask a question in the talk. Of course, it has to be a good question. If you think hard about it, before the talk, you should read the abstract of the paper to have an idea of what you could possibly ask. But asking a good question in a conference session, that gets you a long way to being known. Especially if there are lots of people in the audience, because it's not just the speaker who may hear about you, but other people will start wondering who is this graduate students, where is he from or she from, and so on, right? And so that's the way you build your connections. And why do you need connections? Okay, so for one thing, that you get into places, but it helps you get good letters, get supporting letters. Getting letters from your advisor, every letter from an advisor is automatically very good. So there's not much thing to be learned from, often from those letters. Letters from other faculty members in your department are very useful, but letters from outsiders, especially respected people, highly respected people, their letters are very much respected, because people know that's hard to get somebody like that to write a letter for a start. So just having that person's name on your list of references adds a lot and increases the chance that in a stack of 200 applications, your application will be put aside as one to be given more consideration. You might not yet get an interview at that point. Yeah, there are of course lots of things, but it helps a lot. So that's the main point I wanted to make.
Thanks, Andre. To build on a couple of things that people have said, Dipankar talked about changing his application around depending on what the needs of the department was he was applying to. That's very important, including which courses you say you might be able to teach, depends on the place. I have had a number of students co-supervised with Professor Fu in the business school, ECE students, and given what they were working on, they could apply to ECE departments, they could apply to industrial engineering and operations research departments, they could apply to business schools, and their applications look different to each of these places. I would imagine Professor Walsworth's students could apply to ECE departments and physics departments, and their applications would look different. Professor Barua's students might apply to ECE and computer science departments, and their applications would look different. So it's just something to think about. You don't just do one application and send the same thing to everybody. I did want to respond to the question that I raised, that was raised in the chat. Is it preferable to deviate from the research focus of your PhD in a postdoc? I guess one thing I would say is, so one of our outstanding faculty, Professor Babati, did a PhD in sort of information theory and signal processing at Harvard, and then he did a postdoc with someone who's in a joint Harvard MIT Health Sciences program. He's both a double
Emery
PhD.
Brown, Dr.
Emery Brown is both a double PhD and an anesthesiologist. And Professor Babati learned all about, neurophysiology and neural signal processing, and it has enabled him to have this amazing research program. But he didn't give up what he was doing before. So what I would say is sometimes it's really interesting to go into something that's maybe an application of what you're doing, but you don't want to give up what you've started, because you need to continue that along as well in order to keep publishing. I'm kind of wondering what Sahil and Dipankar did in their postdocs along these lines. Was it similar? Was it different?
Kind of. So it's a balance, because you need to think that you might be applying again, or you'll be applying for faculty in like 2-3 years of your postdoc. So it's a steep curve of learning new things, and you might not be able to publish, then your profile might not be that different from what it was as a PhD student. So it's a really a balance. Obviously, you want to go outside of what you have been doing as a PhD student. For me, it was looking at just designing hardware and applying physiological signals, going into more looking at how clinical trials are performed with hardware. So it's a little different, but you still have the hardware component. You have those kind of things which you took from your PhD. So it needs to be a balance, because you still need to keep publishing as a postdoc to show that you are because if you show that you were able to publish even with a different advisor, it shows that you are yourself motivated to be good in that different research area. So that's a tricky balance. You need to take care of that. That's my opinion on what I did.
Dipankar?
Yeah, I completely second that. It's a balance. Like, you need your publication, and postdoc is the time to build it if you don't have that in PhD. But also you have to show that you are not too narrow in your thinking process, so that what you started in your PhD 5 years ago, you're continuing this for another 2-3 years. So you have to show that you have the ability to tweak a little bit. You can adjust your problem. You can look into cross-disciplinary problems where you can apply what you learned in your PhD and solve a problem from other venues. So what I did for me was, my background is in ECE, but I did my postdoc in aerospace. Although it's a department jump, but I still worked on robotics and controls. The fundamentals are the same. The applications were a little different. In my postdoc, I was able to learn more how they treat, control systems from aerospace. What are the key terms? What are the things they talk about? So if I go for an interview in an aerospace department, I can at least show that I'm aware with the field. Although my base is controls, that's what I want to promote. I applied some of these into aerospace applications. So this is what you have to do. And I think it's a good idea to change a little bit from your course, because that gives you a fresh view of where you can apply your, be it an algorithm, be it a theory that you have developed in your PhD, because you never know, you'd be surprised to see how many applications you have of the work you have done in PhD. So it's good to have a little bit of new view, but do it with a caution that you also have to publish. You don't want to spend a year of your postdoc just to learn the new things. No, you should be able to learn it in the first 6 months max. And then after that, you should have a workable draft so that you can put for publications and so forth. So I would also say, as Sahil mentioned, it's a balance.
I want to add on that as a junior faculty, because the tenure clock has given you a finite amount of time to perform and reach certain expectations. This kind of very strategic, deliberate, controlled expansion of your research interest would also be very much beneficial. That is, you have some of the topic that you continue to work on, maybe deepen it, or maybe with different aspects, and that you are already have developed a good expertise, and you have relative more kind of idea or control on what will be the outcomes along that line. But in the meantime, it will be really good to explore some of the newer directions, which may be more risky, but you do along the way to help broaden your horizons and broaden your research program, and leading to newer opportunities, both in terms of funding and as well as in terms of research discovery and contributions. And this is really a balance. I think many aspects of both PhD studies and the faculty or technical careers are really strike a balance. I mean, for most of the people, this will be kind of, you are really like building a portfolio. When we buy stocks, we also want to build a portfolio with a mix of, in terms of the risk and reward and uncertainty and certainties. That would help you to achieve both, I mean, multiple objectives here, both in terms of a constant streams of outcomes, research deliverables that you can you can have, as well as allow you to not only on a narrow field, but expanding your horizons to explore.
Steve,
Yes.
wanted to add something here,
Okay.
Rajiv here. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, so one of the things that's important is that when you are applying, you know, there are several advantages to talking to other faculty in your department, as Steve and others have mentioned. And there are one great way to do that is to bring them into your PhD dissertation committee. So in fact, you know, the rule is that you're supposed to have a PhD dissertation committee before your proposal exam. And then you have an expanded one by the time you get to the actual defense. You're supposed to have 3 members by the time you get to your proposal exam and 5 members by the time you graduate. However, there is nothing saying that you have to get them at the last moment. You can get them a year before your proposal exam. You know, you could and that's a great idea. That's an excellent way to get other faculty members involved. So what you do is you write to them, you talk to your advisor first, talk about who the best people in your department might be, who have complementary interests that can help improve the area of, you know, your dissertation. Take the best people in the field. Do not worry about people who are going to give too many critical comments. You want those people. Believe me, some people think, you know, your enemy is other committee members who are going to make it difficult for you to graduate. They're not the enemy. The enemy are these anonymous reviewers who are going to shoot down your papers in conferences and journals. So to defeat the enemy, you need allies, and your PhD committee is your allies to help you improve your defense so you can defeat the real enemy. I'm being facetious, of course. There are no enemies here, but you get what I'm saying, right? You need to bring in your PhD committee members and get critical comments from them so that by the time you submit to anonymous reviewers, you have a good paper. So bring them in 2 or 3 years before you graduate. They're not your advisors, so you can't expect to talk to them every week. But every 3 months, every quarter, or every 6 months, yeah, go talk to them. Say, this is the problem I'm dealing with. This is some of the challenges I see. What is your feedback on what I've done so far? What are your guidance for what I'm going to do? This accomplishes two things, right? The two things it accomplishes: one, it makes it easier for you to graduate because you already know what your committee is going to say. Number two, it helps you get papers with maybe some of their students. Like you, it may or may not end up being a collaboration with them, but you could get additional papers from their students where you're co-authors, so that'll increase your total paper count. And number three, these people, these committee members, if you make a good impression, you can ask them for letters. So that's a great way of getting letters. And number four, you can, if you get to know them well, they can even suggest universities and they can write emails to faculty they know at different schools and say, hey, we have a student graduating from my university. He's not my student, but I'm on his committee. I know he's really good. Could you take a look at him? Now, those references are not going to help you get a job, but they will help you get a first interview. Your resume is not less likely to land up in the trash can. So bring in committee members. Your committee members are a great way of getting people involved. Yeah.
One other way of getting help from faculty members, one of the things on this long list of topics that Priyanka sent me was things we won't get into the details of, like resume and CV preparation, cover letters, research and teaching statements, etc. What I would say about those is, like with many of the other things we've talked about, get examples. Ask Dipankar or Sahil or other recently hired faculty at the University of Maryland. Ask them if they'll share their, research and teaching statements with you, for example. If you're in the future faculty program, which Professor Wu has put information about in the chat, one of the things you do as part of that program is to write research statements and teaching statements and get practice with those things. But it's always good to see successful examples because, when you're just first starting out, what in the world is a research statement or what is a teaching statement and what does that look like? It's just totally abstract. So anyway, other thoughts from the panel? We had one other question from Franklin. What's more difficult to write, the PhD thesis or a research proposal for funding? Any comments?
Well, let me just quickly make a comment. There are two totally different animals, right? A PhD thesis is the last word on a topic where you have taken a narrow topic and you have researched it till death and proven QED that these results work and that this benefit that you come up with is real. A research proposal is much more about, here's a really broad, exciting direction, which I don't know how exactly to do it, but here are some promising avenues to explore. And here's some initial results that might help me get there. But it's much broader. It has to be much more, on a PhD proposal, the premium is on completeness. Not trying to get people only excited. You have to convince them that your work is complete. Whereas in a proposal, a lot of it is about excitement. You have to convince them that this is exciting, this is a broad direction, that if solved will be a major advance, and that you have some credibility in solving that problem. You have some initial results that help convince them that this is doable. So those are two completely different documents. But yeah, that's
okay. So one question in the chat: what is some advice you would give an undergrad interested in pursuing a PhD and getting into academia? My first thought is do research with a faculty member. So you see what this is about. It'll help you get into graduate school. Other thoughts?
Do a master's perhaps, do a master's thesis research oriented, so you get an idea how research is, what is expected as a researcher, and then you will see whether you would like to continue on that path or whether industry And also, if possible, that what I always tell my friends and colleagues, that if you are a PhD students or even master students, do an internship in an industry. That will give you some flavor about industry, what are the responsibilities and expectations there. You might not like those as well. 9 a.m. stand-up meeting might not be your cup of tea. So you will know that if you do an internship. So I would say, like, do masters, see if you like it, go from there.
I added to that for undergraduate to get a flavor of what a PhD may look like, research experience would be beneficial. And also for graduate student, I echo Dipankar that an industry internship would give you broaden your horizon. And also depending on the type of companies and organizations that you interned with, if some would be more kind of research oriented, you may also have publications and broaden your areas and have things that you can put on your resume. And for example, in some of the areas these days in AI machine learning, various major companies, they are actively publishing in those areas in top venues. This can help add credentials and add the breadth to your training. And some of your mentors in the internship may also be a source to provide a good letter because of they have concrete things to talk about their work experience with you. And echoing what Professor Bora had mentioned earlier, the nurture your interactions with your advisor, but much also beyond your advisor, with other faculty members, with other researchers you gradually got to know through doing good work, attending conferences, got to know and to try to maintain those connections. And if you do an internship, also maintain that connection. It takes effort, takes your initiatives to maintain, to update them with your progress. But those can be your network of mentors and supporters, and you will find it beneficial for your whole career and in the long run to establish such a strong network of supporters. And it takes time. Don't get the faculty and only ask them the day or the week before you submit your application.
So there's another question in the chat. Are summer internships a red flag for academia? Is visiting another university better for reputation, collaborations, connections, etc.? I would say absolutely not, especially in engineering departments. If you do a summer internship with a company, as Professor Wu just said, you can keep those connections going. It may help you in your research program eventually. It may help you find applications. And as was said earlier, it also can help you decide whether you actually want to be in industry or academia. We are just about out of time. Any final comments from any of the panelists? Anything else anybody is inspired to say?
I will mention that regarding this question about an undergrad,
Yeah,
getting involved in research as soon as possible is a good thing. It tells you whether that's what you want to do. And it builds your skill set. And as a faculty member, when I'm looking at potential graduate students applying to grad school, one of the things I look at is, do they have research experience as an undergrad? And particularly, is it kind of deep experience? Meaning, not just they've done 2 months in one research group and 2 months in another and 2 months in a third, but they've worked for a year or a year and a half or 2 years with one group accomplishing something real, working alongside probably graduate students, maybe postdocs. Some get to the point of having their name as co-authors on a significant paper, that kind of thing. And that also shows commitment. People are committed and they find through that experience that this is for them. So I would encourage you and other undergrads to, all undergrads, to pursue this if it seems interesting. Question of how? Well, just email some professors whose research looks interesting to you, and then talk to them.
and talk to the professors you're taking courses from, and ask, because they you already know them kind of, ask them about their research.
Also look at NSF
and
REU sites. There are significant NSF funding, which allows you to go to different schools over the summer to do research REUs, which are also gives you a experience in working in a different lab, a different school.
Right.
so what Professor Woolworth had a touch on is, I mean, when you do this research experience, don't just do superficial, and do some solid work, and actually extending from that for our graduate student, whatever you do, whatever you decide on to take on, whenever possible, try to do your best and associate your name with the excellence and good work, so that people can count on and trust on, and people can speak highly about. And all those will help you to build up and gather more and get more opportunities one after another.
So I think we're going to have to conclude, but I want to thank all of the panelists, and especially our two panelists who are, well, I don't know where everybody is, but I know Dipankar and Sahil are not here, not close by, and I really appreciate all of you participating, and want to thank Priyanka for putting this all together and sending us many email reminders, because faculty forget things, and so I hope this was useful.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Marcus, for successfully conducting this panel in such a smooth manner. And I would like to thank all the participants for sharing their valuable experiences today. And yes, so I would close this session by thanking all the audience members for being with us here. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.